Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of our Industry Insight series here at Tuya Hospitality and Residential. Across the course of this series, we're going to be inviting experts from across both sectors to provide some invaluable insight around the implementation of IoT and discussion around some of the opportunities it brings for businesses, but also around some of the core barriers we're facing against this increased innovation. Over the next few episodes, we're going to be taking a deep dive into hospitality with some fantastic guests who have worked on both sides of the industry, so both within hotels, but also some outstanding hotel tech businesses. And for today's show, I have the pleasure of inviting Brendon Granger from Technology for Hotels. Brendon holds a great passion for all things hotels, but in particular, technology, and a desire to help others. His role at Technology for Hotels allows him to do both. Brendon has worked with hundreds of hotels to help them with their in-room technology. He has helped them to reduce costs, increase guest satisfaction, and win awards such as the best business hotel, the best city hotel, the best upscale hotel, and the best luxury hotel in Australasia. Always going the extra mile, Brendon has his hospitality career over 30 years ago. He's held various management positions within five-star hotels, worked as a consultant in both hotel feasibility and technology, and has an extensive background in hotel tech, having worked for a number of leading global technology vendors in consulting or executive level roles. So, Brendon, welcome. Thanks so much for coming on, and welcome for being the first guest today.
Thank you, Dylan. An absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Sure, no problem at all. Just to kick off today, we're going to go a bit more about, into your background as well. And you've been in the game for a long time, both within hotels and tech. So I kind of wanted for our audience today to kind of get the big picture of where we're at the moment. Because often we're quite guilty as an IoT business in just kind of focusing in on the IoT. But I guess what we wanted to start with from your experience is that what trends have you seen throughout your career in tech adoption, beginning right from the start? What things have you seen that started off as like a nice perk in hotels that turned into a must-have? Wi-Fi is a good example people like to bring up. And where do you see we're at the moment with some of the what we call smart or IoT-related elements that's being implemented in hospitality?
Fantastic. That's a great question, Dylan. Gosh, how far back do we go? I started in hotels before we really had computers. Mm-hmm. We had, mainframe style computers, and they were terminals, green screen type terminals on the front desk. So a lot has changed, thankfully. Mm-hmm. Probably a couple of the big things. I was lucky enough to be involved with the introduction of the internet in hotels in the early 2000s. And it was interesting how quickly that changed. I remember I was in a sales role initially in 2000, I think it might have been in 2003. We went to a very large hotel chain, and we were talking about providing their guests with high-speed internet. And their opinion at that point was, well, we don't need it. Everybody uses dial-up. Mm-hmm. And it was probably less than 12 months later, the market literally turned and the demand for that sort of product increased dramatically. So, and since then, I think one of the biggest changes that I've seen is actually the introduction of the smartphone. Mm-hmm. It's revolutionized, I think, everybody's life. It's made a difference to the guest at the hotel. They're bringing their own device with them, with their own content these days, with their ability to do so much. But from a hotel point of view as well, we're starting to see, only in the last couple of years, by using smart devices for staff, jobs can be dispatched directly and efficiencies can be gained within the hotel. Mm-hmm. As to where we're going, I think a lot of what we see is actually shaped by consumer trends. So the smartphone was an example. I know today, of course, we're going to be talking about smart rooms and IoT. And I see that, once we get to a critical point within homes, then that will spill over into the hospitality industry. And it will become an expectation, We've got this at home, we should have this at a hotel.
Yeah. I think that's the thing we're seeing as well. We'll be discussing this for the guests who are watching in another series as well, pushing forwards. But it's, again, when does that gap come through of what I have at home is expected in the hotel or apartment, right? We kind of call it technological friction, and that generally tends to come on two levels, right? And it's all about balance. So you can have friction for guests who have very smart homes at home and it's a downgrade going to the hotel. But I guess more commonly the friction comes from those who don't have the tech at home and they get in and there's a friction of how to use these things. So what we need to kind of encourage from our side is that we're not telling everyone to go all in. It's about finding the balance of what can be for those who don't have the experience, be an interesting thing when they get to the hotel that's manageable, because we're still in this transition period. But also as we move forward, the focus is still going to be on those who might be downgrading a little bit by entering the hotel and a bit dissatisfied with the things that, Wi-Fi would be the one that all those people having Wi-Fi at homes that entered a hotel without. I'm sure there was a transition period in which they believe that to be okay, I can accept, and now it's pushed towards it's the same as not having a bed in the room, right? It's it's a necessity. So
yeah, it's a really good point. It was, you're quite right, because we don't have to go back too far. When there were lots and lots of guest complaints about the quality of the Wi-Fi the hotel was delivering and the fact that they were charging for it. It's a given these days that you should have high-speed Wi-Fi everywhere across the hotel. It doesn't matter whether you're on the tennis court or in your room. It needs to be good, needs to be fast, and it needs to be free.
It's exactly, and I think for us, when we focus in on IoT at the moment, we don't kid ourselves. Smart home adoption's been good, but it's still not exactly that everyone has smart devices in their homes. It's not everyone has completely smart homes these days, and when we look at that with hotels, we do see that there is a transition going on. And I guess the message we try and get across is that just keep in mind as consumer trends are continuing to change. And we've seen from our side in the IoT sector, particularly more on a smart home level during COVID, with increases in things like work from home schemes and people just generally spending more time at home isn't just for the tech. They've been investing in their work from home environments, right? And a lot of the time from our side, we've seen the market really pick up in that sense as people adopting smart home tech a bit more. So I guess from my experience, it's when I look back to a few years ago, smart home adoption kind of started with people saying, yes, I've got Alexa in my house. That was about it. I ask it, how's the weather today? And generally we're seeing more devices being compounded as we go forwards, both on a consumer level, but we are seeing a pick up in the industry solutions as well. So when we look at hotels, but also apartments, it's people are kind of building in step by step now, just to meet the expectation. And these things, I guess, we'll talk about today. But the most common one we're seeing is around smart locks and also around some energy saving solutions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I guess for your side, so keeping in mind that first question, it's the pandemic's obviously pushed some things in certain directions in the industry, whether or not it's for good and bad, including IoT, but also on a broader scale. What do you think has been given a bit of a push forwards during the pandemic in regards to technology?
I mean, broadly, technology in hospitality is, I think McKinsey said that in the first 6 months of the pandemic, the hotel industry pushed ahead something like 4 or 5 years. And there's also been statistics about, technology's probably moved ahead 10 years. In hospitality, it needed to, definitely. And I think it's been a welcomed push. What we've seen, I suppose the way I'd summarise it is more self-service from the guest point of view. So that was obviously originally introduced from a health and safety point of view to reduce contact points. But I think it's a convenience that guests, they've already used pre-arrival check-in in the airline industry. Used it well. I think statistically it's something like 87% of people check into a flight before they go to the airport, yet the numbers in hotels were 3%, something like that. So there's a big opportunity there, and I think it's something that's certainly been pushed ahead as far as the pandemic goes. Once you get to the hotel, then you've obviously got in-room digital compendiums, which the guest uses on their own device. The ability, and those compendiums can answer all of the questions. Often they have chatbots built into them, so They'll be able to answer frequently asked questions that the guest has. And then you've got digital ordering. So all of that has been really driven by the pandemic.
Yeah, we've seen the exact same thing. The bottom line throughout the pandemic was, how do we sadly reduce the amount of human contact, right? That was what got pushed forward, which for me, I love visiting hotels, and I'm a huge fan of service that comes with it, right? So it was, of course, on a personal level, slightly disappointing at times. However, for business and technology, it's been a really great push for us. Hospitality remains to be about people. We firmly believe that. But we also see that the implementation, particularly of, for example, contactless access, kind of enhances that. And from our experience, I'm based in China right now, for those of you who don't know, and we see that there's been an increasing push forwards with the smart tech here for reasons we can kind of discuss today. But having visited various hotels that are just implementing the contactless check-in piece, you notice that they're not getting rid of the staff for that, which I think is a real common misconception. It's really enhancing the way in which they deliver service. Like, I remember I visited a few very smart hotels that kind of lean towards the having IoT as a value proposition kind of thing. And I remember visiting, and out of curiosity, when you walk into the check-in desk, which there isn't, it's just kind of a hall, there's kind of staff floating around. So the mainland Chinese people who visit the hotel, they have check-in things that you just use a machine and you put your ID card. For me, I have to find a member of staff and use my passport. In those, they were using facial recognition, which made things to another level. We don't really push for that so much in international markets. That there are differences that are quite obvious with that. But the key message here is that the thing that impressed me with it was that these staff were there fully attending to what I was doing and offering any service I would. So I remember I asked, can you give me a tour of the hotel? Show me everything you got to offer. And they didn't know I was coming there from a business perspective. I was just visiting. And they're like, yeah, sure, we'll bring someone over, we'll show you around. And it just kind of freed up time for them to be more attentive to the guests. And this is kind of when we start introducing the tech, the benefits we're seeing, and we hope this can kind of be a message moving forwards. It's not just about, let's say, the somewhat dystopian view of we don't want anyone speaking to each other when you visit a hotel.
Yep.
It's not about that, because the pandemic is somewhat on its way out, and we do see things going back to normal. But for those companies who have things in place now, it's not about getting rid of the staff. It's about saying, okay, how can we leverage the tech to offer a much more refined and personalized degree of service?
100%, Dylan. Couldn't agree more. And I've been saying that for years. I mean, I've always said that, technology is not really designed to replace. It's designed to enhance. And it doesn't matter whether it's robots or pre-arrival check-in. All of those technologies allow staff that exist within the property, as you said, to deliver a personalised service. And the check-in is a classic example. When you check into a hotel using the traditional method, it really is about paperwork. The receptionist asks you for potentially a passport if you're an international guest. They want a credit card. They want you to sign the registration card. It really is about completing the paperwork that the hotel requires. If you've done that before you arrive, when you get to the property, it's a much more welcoming experience, and it's a conversation. And as you said, they can talk to you about the features of the property. They could walk you to your room potentially. There's lots of opportunities there. What we're also seeing though globally is we had it pre-pandemic, but the pandemic has accelerated it. We've got a labour shortage.
Yeah.
And I don't think that problem is going to go away quickly. So I think hotels need to use technology to streamline their operations, to help support the existing staff that are there. So they won't be replacing staff. They'll actually be helping the staff that you do have do their job more efficiently, making sure that they don't, things don't fall through the cracks, be it a guest request management solution or some form of digital ordering solution. All of those systems also come with reporting on the back end, which allows the hotel management to sort of look at it and say, well, hang on a second, we are delivering X many bottles of water up to the room. How about we just put 2 bottles of water in every room? we'll reduce guest friction. We'll cut down on the number of staff required to run up and down and deliver, or robots to run up and down and deliver bottles of water. So there are economies and efficiencies from all of this technology.
So from your side, I guess focusing again around the staff shortage, do you think that there's been an increased focus from hotels on kind of squeezing the costs and cutting costs and taking a deeper dive in some of the data they're seeing from around their operations? Do you think that's been pushed a little bit more by the pandemic, or was that always there? And people are always very analytic around specific costs around the hotel?
I know. I think the pandemic has certainly pushed it. Mm-hmm. And I saw a comment from the previous CEO of a call here in the Asia Pacific. You know, pre-pandemic, you know, our market was extremely buoyant for hospitality. We had some very, very good years. And as he said, you know, when things are particularly good, you don't need to be penny wise. Mm-hmm. Yet when the pandemic hit, and obviously occupancy was reduced and hotels were even closed, every dollar spent had to be scrutinised.
Yeah.
His point was that as we come out of the pandemic, people have now learned those skills, and it will actually result in more profitable business in the future. We are starting to see here, I think, we're at a turning point, and it may take even a little bit longer for hotels to realise that the labour shortage is actually a longer-term problem than they thought. The initial hope was that when Australia opened its borders, and we did that on the 21st of February, that overseas students would return and they would help support, you know, the loss of labour. But we haven't seen that yet, and I don't think we're going to see it to the same levels that were expected. So I think we're really at an interesting point now where hotels are starting to look even further at technology and how it can actually help them, you know, streamline their operation. And people talk about, you know, doing more with less. That's a really common term.
It's, from what we're seeing on our side, is that there's kind of two different types of companies in the space. One is obviously a much larger sector. The one is your traditional style hotel, which is having to find ways to re-innovate, right? Companies like Accor do it really well. You know, they have a technology-specific department, as with much of the bigger brands. But it's much harder, we see, for maybe those mid-scale hotels or even privately owned ones, that changing operations is difficult, right? And doing more with less, especially with tech, requires a lot of training that comes in. On the other side of the coin, we look at these younger companies that focus more, for example, towards co-living. And they have a thing that when they begin with a tech focus, a lot of them came from the tech industry themselves. And that's kind of how they're founding the business moving forwards. We work with people on both sides of the coin. There's a bit of a disparity between the two when it comes to that. But I think when we look at these companies now, on the latter, that are kind of pushing things forwards and beginning with tech as a final mindset, it's going to be kind of a leading example for those moving forwards on the other side of the coin, right? We're going to start looking at that and seeing, okay, look, it's still pretty early stages. It's in that transition period, but this will soon become a prerequisite for guests, especially the younger generation as well. So it's our focus, and I guess what we'll talk about today is we love working with those really innovative companies. We're fantastic with that, and it's really easy for us to direct our message as well across because we're on a very common wavelength. I think what we kind of want to break down today is demystifying some of the ideas around, you know, commonly called smart hotels, and kind of breaking it down what it actually means in terms of operations and in terms of the guest experience as well. So from our side, we kind of break it down into a few different factions at Tuya. We look at it in different ways. And like we mentioned earlier, it's not about throwing them all in at once into your hotel and completely revamping it. We kind of break it down into access control, so that contactless check-in we've been talking about, which is a big piece from us. The energy management, operations efficiency, security as well, and then also around the guest experience, kind of the final point, right? Because from us, we work across the IT sector, but specifically for me, I focus on hotels and apartments. Because in regards to our technology, it runs in quite a similar way on the back end. It's just on the front end, some operational differences. So when we look at it in that sense, it's at the moment with apartments, they like to put in the tech as a way of saying, how do I raise the costs? How do I raise the value of my property? How can I make this more attractive? Can I increase the rent per month by $100, $20, whatever? Hotels we've seen don't really tend to do that, especially during a pandemic. Most are saying we're not investing in improving the guest experience so much right now. Perhaps some of those that have recently acquired a hotel during the pandemic are a bit different. But, I'm sure with your business as well, you found that pushing the idea of just in-room automation is a bit of a tough sell at a time when people are really cutting costs. So we focus on kind of breaking down on a more operational level. And like we said earlier, it's the access control is kind of the first piece, right? It's having that in place and then building on the rest. And we'll kind of go into regional differences as well. And just making sure you have systems in place to start with one area, for example, access control, and then move towards energy management, and then also security. And then you can kind of bring it all together over the next few years as they come. So today, I don't think we'll dive too much into the specifics. I can kind of give some information to people afterwards if they need that. But just generally for an introduction about the way IoT works, particularly within a hotel, and a bit about ourselves, I can kind of highlight a bit. And we can kind of discuss a definition around it as well. But the way we see it at the moment is kind of, without using a very typical introduction for IoT, it's essentially utilizing a series of connected hardware devices that people like to use the term speak to each other, which I think is still a bit of a weird and hard to understand term for hoteliers. Essentially, it's having these pieces of hardware that work together, normally through a gateway on our side, and they're combined with a software for managing them, tracking them, controlling them, right? So, for example, when we have a smart access solution, this could be combining a series of different devices, whether or not it's a smart lock, but also a smart intercom if you're managing an apartment building as well, or an Airbnb. Then also that matches into sensors that we put in, right? So, for example, occupancy sensors, noting how many people are in the common area. This all becomes part of an access solution. And it's not just buying your traditional, let's call it traditional, your RFID card lock and saying that's my access solution, because we don't call that too smart. The idea of smart, or at least with IoT, is that how are these working together as part of kind of a puzzle, let's say. And it's that puzzle we're looking for hotels to build, and you can build it incrementally. So what we do at Tuya, and I guess a bit of a background about us, is that we've been doing IoT for a very long time. Traditionally, it was kind of over the past early 5 years of the business, a lot was towards smart home, and we built a platform of a vast number of devices, and people were implementing these in their homes, and we saw smart home picking up. What we then saw is that there wasn't really any comprehensive, let's say, industry-targeted solutions, particularly for hospitality. People were kind of trying to piece together different companies when building a smart hotel or an interconnected hotel and trying to make integrations work. We realized that we've got an IoT platform that's real strong, combined with a vast range of hardware, all of which can cover a smart hotel experience for an interconnected hotel. And then we built a software platform for entry-level people. So that's for people who don't have any software development experience. So you can plug and play that into a hotel. But then also we open up our platform. So if you've already got some kind of existing software available in the hotel, whether it's just an app or whether or not, for example, developing smart lock solutions, we say we want to help you build that puzzle and build the full smart solution with that. So that's what we focus on. And I guess a final note from our side is that perhaps it's not the most common way of doing things and it's a little bit hard to understand, but we call ourselves B2B. So that means that for us as Tuya, it's the reason we're talking today is because you're a hotel expert. And we are definitely not hotel experts in a sense, and we haven't been in the game for as long as you guys have. What we focus on is trying to increase the availability of the tech, because that's what our strength is. So we don't tend to work so much directly with end hotels, which we would call a 2C environment. But what we focus on is finding really interesting businesses in local regions who think, okay, I could really push my business if I had this tech available to me. So whether or not you're a property manager, whether or not you're a tech company looking to push, let's say, smart hotel apps, we say we could add all the hardware layer backed up by our platform, and then have the opportunity for you to build your business at a considerably lower cost. So that's what we focus on.
So, Dylan, thanks for that excellent explanation on how Tuya operates. I must admit, when I was first introduced to the company, I did find it difficult myself to work out how how Tuya fitted into it. But as I've learned more, I truly appreciate the platform that you are developing. So you are, as you said, you are taking hundreds of thousands of devices and making sure that they actually communicate with each other, and then developing a platform that allows you to manage those devices. And it's always been an issue in hotels. Getting any two systems to talk, is the bane of most hotel IT stuff. Interfacing, as we call it, is always an issue. And I think what you guys are doing is really creating a standard, so to speak, that allows IoT devices to be more usable, which is fantastic. Yep.
Yeah, it's even for me when I first joined, the logic was a little bit tricky, trying to understand what we're trying to push forwards. It's always been our business, even if we were doing the smart home stuff before. We were never building like a brand of smart products. That wasn't really our thing. It's more about saying, if you want to begin your business with IoT, but you recognize that there's huge barriers to entry regarding costs, we open ourselves up with the platform, and we're really flexible in how you want to build that into your business. And the same goes for hospitality businesses. I'll stop talking about us too much shortly, but the idea just is that if you're looking and you think you can implement IoT in your business, but you're worried about the cost of getting started up and you don't know where to begin, come and speak to us. We will work more like on a consultant basis with you, because like we kind of will discuss more today, it's not about everything having to be implemented at once and in one package. We don't say you need to go and turn your hotel to be having the full bells and whistles tomorrow, with the robots running around delivering food into interconnected rooms and smart locks. We want people to come to us and say, look, okay, in the short term, I just need to build a smart access solution for hotels. What can you guys do to help me? And then we can go and do that. Or we have people coming in saying that we just want to focus on energy savings. So whether or not they're using thermostats and sensors, combining those, we just want to improve the energy efficiency of the hotel. We can cover that as well. It's what we just focus on, and what we push forwards is that getting a system in place that can be A, scalable, B, somewhat future-proof, so that you can, when you move forwards, you want to build these things up. Doing it with us, we believe, is a bit more of an efficient way, instead of having to run integrations through all the different systems. We don't focus on taking over the whole market of selling directly to hotels. We just want businesses and hoteliers who recognize that they need to have a platform in place they can use to build that puzzle piece, essentially, to recognize that we're available and we can work with you, and we can see if there's any ways in which we can support.
Perfect.
So yes, it's enough about Tuya, I think. It's more about your experience moving forwards as we go through this. So I guess we'll get back to the conversation around IoT within hospitality. And the question we kind of noted previously was, are there any smart rooms? That was a very interesting topic people often ask. And I think I'd like to hear your opinion on that one first, and then we can pitch in.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I suppose it depends on your definition of a smart room too, right? And it can be quite broad. I think the term is used far too broadly. I've heard, probably not so much now, but a few years ago, hotels were saying, they had the latest technology in the hotel rooms because they had a smart TV. That's not really what a smart room is. I think you touched on it, Dylan, but the way I see a smart room, it's a room that actually obviously has IoT devices in it. Those devices collect information on the guest, likes, dislikes. They store that information, and then that information is brought back on the guest's next stay. So it could be something as simple as, whenever I stay at the property, I set the thermostat to 22.5 degrees Celsius. And the system records that, and I like the fan speed on, span 3, the span feed on 3 rather than 5 or whatever it is, or I like the shower pressure at this and I like the temperature at that. I see smart rooms literally recording that information, sending it to something like the property management system, attaching it to the guest record. And when I stay again, the room actually sets itself up appropriately for me. So if that's the definition, I don't think, to my mind, there are any smart rooms in the market today. There are certainly hotel chains that have prototype rooms at head office, and they are exploring that technology. But I think that technology is unfortunately still some way away from being deployed, on a global basis and being deployed at scale. But I think, as you said, that's not necessarily the case. You can start, obviously access control is a big one. Everybody's been talking about mobile key for 10 years or more. We've heard discussions regarding mobile key come up again as a result of the pandemic. And I know that there are lots of hotel chains that are now really pushing hard on delivering that as a solution. So having smart locks that allow the guest to use their mobile phone or even a key code to access the room is something that's going to happen quite quickly. The other thing, of course, is, as you said, energy management. New build hotels, it's a given. We have laws in the Australian market that, for a hotel, basically, when the guest is not in the room, then the HVAC and the lighting should be off. If you were built before those laws became relevant, you're sort of exempt, but new builds are not. But there's still a lot of opportunity for older properties to actually implement access control and energy management. And then they'll add to that later on, as we said, as we start to see the penetration of smart homes increase, then we'll reach that point where it becomes an expectation in hotels as well.
I think I'm on the same page you as that one. It's from our side, the point you hit first is more about that hyper-personalization and predictability of the guest experience. What I will say at the moment is that is at the very high end of where the technology is at. There are people around there doing it, and I've seen it implemented. But in reality, on the majority of people implementing this, is that they have that in-room automation, again, as part of the interconnected hotel. So when we talk about the guest experience, that means that when the guest comes to the hotel, they normally have a web-based app that they use. For example, they click the link via text message, they open it. That will give them a key to get into the door, first of all, and they can click the button to open the door as well. Then when they enter the room, they're normally greeted. For example, a sensor is tracked or the door's recognized to be opened. That means the lights and things will automate and turn on. The HVAC will be set to the right temperature. And then once they're in the room, again, it's about using that app and having more control over what's available in the room, which for now, it's a nice perk. And we still encourage to have that traditional level. So, for example, there's still going to be a light switch on the wall. We're not going to have a completely voice-controlled room because, again, it looks back on friction. It's just that moving forwards, that offering that extra degree of control, which at the moment remains a perk, for example, for me to control the lights in my voice via Alexa or control it via my phone, will soon turn to become a bit more of an expectation over the next few years. So when we focus on the guest experience in that sense, it's at the moment, it's for sure a nice thing to have. And as we move forwards, it's going to be an increasing perk and more of an expectation. But we don't tend to look too much at that because, as you know, especially during the pandemic, there's slim amounts of people who see that as a really valuable asset right now. We're not going to lie about that. It's more about those devices that are in the rooms, kind of links into what you said. It's more about when the guest actually isn't in the room, to be honest with you. This is where it becomes more important. Because like I say, we work with residential properties and hotels. It's a huge thing for particularly multifamily, the management of vacant units. But generally from our side, we see that's much easier to manage because it's long stay, right? You know, if the unit's vacant, it might be vacant for 6 months. So you just have to shut it down and keep an eye on it. Hotels, it's a much more dynamic situation of people coming and going. At the pandemic, I guess there's a few more empty rooms, but it's more, again, about being able to track the energy, particularly, that's coming in and out of those rooms, and then having full traceability on other aspects. For example, for door lock access, you can see, okay, who's been coming and going from that door. For example, for cleaning staff, to keep an eye on operations. It's things like this that we tend to focus more on. The guest in-room experience is obviously a massive perk, and whenever you implement a interconnected or smart hotel, it is going to be a case and it's going to be there. But most of the value more comes from actually things that the guest doesn't have control of, if I'm being honest with you. It's more there's times when the guest isn't there. And that's what we want people to focus on. Locks kind of sit somewhere in the middle, because whether or not the guest is going in the room or not is a must-have. But again, more things like the energy management we see to be as a bigger perk. And it'll kind of lead me... actually, we'll talk about first the question of have we seen smart rooms? I think it depends. Regionally, it's different. Like being based here in China, I must say the reason I'm here is because I see the adoption's been much quicker. We're probably at least 1 or 2 years ahead with that. There's a good example, a group called Granger, you may or may not recognize. They're a huge hotel chain. I think, if not maybe one of the largest here in China. And even for those guys, it's when you go into their standard 2 or 3 star hotels, which are everywhere here, there will be a guest app that you can use to control. For example, the lights, the curtains, the thermostat. They'll have a speaker connected. The difference as well with China is, that you can use facial recognition a bit more, which obviously adds to the experience. We don't see it as a necessity internationally. And then also here we have a full e-commerce ecosystem that's a bit more connected compared to international. However, what I will say is when I look at Gradual and also all the partners that we work with, none of them really focus that much on the value it brings to the guests. They like it, but these guys are still selling rooms for $30 a night in the capital city. They're not saying we're a smart hotel, come visit us, that's our value proposition. It's just adding to the experience and more about the operations. And this is kind of the disparity I'm seeing at the moment being based here, in that the rollout of the tech, whether or not it's literally just the lock or a few sensors for energy management, has been considerably more widespread. And the market here is focused a lot more towards those mid or even low-scale hotels sometimes, who are just using it to streamline operations a little bit. Like I think I raised an example to you before, was that I remember going to like a beach shack here before, way out in the rural areas, and even then I walked in and there was, open this link to control the lock, and there's a smart hotel geek, you look and you see the sensors in there. That kind of speaks to a different conversation about the availability. But what I will say is that there's definitely what you would call a smart room here. But for the most stage, it's more about just that basic level of control, an increased level of the ways in which you interact with your room. Only on the higher end are we seeing that degree of predictability and high personalization, right? That's when it starts pushing into more super smart hotels, and then also more towards how do we really elevate the guest experience, which will come internationally, but we don't see that as a primary focus at the moment as well. So I guess that kind of leads me on to the next point. Obviously, you're based in Australia. So do you see any specific things in your local market that perhaps differ in terms of tech adoption? And do you think there's any ways in which either you can teach a few lessons from what you see in the Australian market, or do you think the Aussie market's got a few things to learn?
I hate to say we've got a few things to learn. The distance, obviously, the tyranny of distance, it's sometimes called. And probably the size of the market. Australia's a big country, but population-wise, we're not that significant. We're probably, our total population is the size of a Chinese city. But spread across a vast landmass. Having said that, we do like technology in Australia, and we have been, Australia and New Zealand have been used, I think, by Google and lots of different companies in the past as test beds. And we have pretty good take-up rates. But from a hotel technology point of view, I think we are behind without a doubt. And I think, as you said, we'd easily be a couple of years behind China, maybe even more than a couple of years. You talked about robots, and I think we've talked about it before. There are no robots. Well, there are 2 robots in a hotel here in Sydney that were bought mainly, as a marketing exercise. I don't think they've actually got a job. I think they stood in the lobby with a tray with hand sanitizer. Was their job. And so we're I think we've been a little bit more cautious. Obviously, the pandemic has had an impact. We don't have our international guests back yet. So you mentioned obviously spending. Up until recently, all spending, unless it was basically for fire life and safety, was sort of suspended. And we're at the point now where we're starting to see hotels waking up and look at what the future holds. So, I think to your point as well, I think it really is efficiencies more than anything. So, energy management, access control, and then later on building on the niceties of the room control itself. There was one point I thought was really significant that you made, and I always make it. And once again, it comes down to technology, not only not replacing staff, but you need to offer a guest a choice within a hotel. So you can't take away, all the light switches and say, well, you now have to turn all the lights on and off with your smartphone. It's just, that creates so much friction. I was literally talking to someone today about a resort here that they stayed at, and there were 9 light switches, and luckily they were staying there for a week. So by the end of the week, they actually had it figured, how to turn the lights off. But if it was a hotel that was, you're staying for 1 or 2 nights, it's creates so much friction having such a complex system to turn the lights on and off. So we need to be mindful of that, and make sure that whatever we do is simple for the guest to use, and that we offer them choice. There are people still that will like a good old-fashioned light switch, and there are people that are quite comfortable talking to an in-room voice assistant to turn the lights off.
It's habit, right? Even for me, when I stay at the smartest hotels, it's, for the first few hours, I'm controlling with my phone and my voice. And I will use that, particularly the voice one, because I find it quite fun for a hotel. But my habit is still that when I walk out and, for example, go take a shower, I'll still press the switch. I'm not going to shout over to Alexa and say, turn on the lights in the bathroom. It's, for now, for the guest experience, you're right, it's about just adding a bit of choice, I guess. It's, again, we're going to see habits changing, and it's going to go from during the transition period that as consumer markets adopt more of the smart tech and people become more used to using, for example, the phone or the voice or any kind of smart control to control the things in their homes, that will be the habit when they go to the hotel. So when they go to think in their heads, okay, how do I turn off the lights? Or how do I control the thermostat? It's that younger generation in particular, the habit will lean more towards calling Alexa or using the phone. And that's when we find, because we're in this transitioning period and very early stage of it, on the guest experience, it's balancing between those who don't have any experience with that yet, and also those who will increasingly become more familiar with that, smart habit. So for now, always from our side is an absolute must-have, particularly for hotels and apartments. A home, it's your choice, is that there always has to be an analog degree of control, right? There's always going to be the exact same thing you're used to that has to be in there. The second you start, like you say, replacing, taking light switches off the walls, then you've got a problem. Taking curtain switches, you've got a smart curtain, but if there's not a switch on the wall to control it, that's friction. You think, okay, how do I put the blinds down, So it always has to be a traditional degree of control for these things. And throughout the transitional period, that means you're in place to accept the new habits of people as well. So I think from our side, going back to the Aussie market specific stuff, we at Tuya, because we're just a platform provider, we don't specify in local markets. So that kind of gives us a bit of a privilege in that we cover people from across the globe. There are some common denominators in most markets, for example, staff shortages, for the most part there. And particularly COVID, pushing that access control solution was worldwide for us. But when we speak to people, for example, in Europe, it's a huge focus tends to be on energy saving because of stricter government regulations. In the US, a lot of it is still much around operations efficiencies, particularly around staff shortages. Aussie is similar to that. And the difference we see mostly in Asia Pacific is that because staff are, let's say, more readily available, there isn't that much of a shortage happening here compared to in other markets. They focus more on elevating the experience. People are coming to hotels, for example, in regions like Southeast Asia. It's how do I make the hotel more valuable? And those are the regions that are focusing on this. And they're thinking more about the room automation because they have, let's say, more cost-efficient energy over there. Staff are more readily available. So they're saying, how can I bring higher value guests to the hotel and increase the value of it here? Particularly in markets like Thailand at the moment, we're seeing that there was a bit of an exodus during COVID, that it really hit the market pretty hard because they lost out to international travel. But kind of, let's say, sprouting out from the ground is this whole new wave of people with newly bought hotels who are like, right, I'm going to go in and invest a significant amount into making this a really attractive place to come, and it's going to be technologically relevant for the next 5 to 10 years. So there's regional differences in the focus, and I guess the bottom line always remains that choose what's right for your region and figure out exactly what the pain point is for yourself. And then obviously with Tuya, we're here to help with that. It's realizing that if we keep using that term of smart hotel to try and cover a really broad spectrum of very significantly different operations, it's going to completely continue to, I guess, confuse and put off hoteliers from getting involved in this, right? I think the discourse has to change, and it has to focus more around the specific things that it actually can do for you, which we've spoken about today. And then just keeping in mind, how do you build that stack over the next few years as we go forwards, right? And we're going to work on our side to improve the discourse and kind of break this down instead of using the term of smart hotel so much. But I think it's really important going forwards. And I guess specifically for different regions, understanding what exactly is needed in your local market and what's the pain point at the moment, and then what can we predict is going to be going forwards.
Yep, I think you're right, Dylan. The term smart hotel is probably too all-encompassing.
Mm-hmm. So I think we'll kind of start wrapping up a bit again, but from your side and from your experience working with hoteliers, implementing all kinds of tech, is that as a broad advice, what would you tend to give as an improvement of attitudes towards tech adoption? And do you have any general rules of thumb for people when they consider, how do I bring tech in? And then also, what do you think on their side is possibly, on a mindset level of a hotelier, preventing them from adopting certain things right now?
Yeah, there's some really good questions there. I think one of the first points, it's probably changing a little bit. Hoteliers have been fairly, I think the term is parochial. They like to deal with people who understand their industry, who talk the same language, who have the same service levels. I mean, hotels are quite demanding in what they expect from their suppliers. And I found that in the past, that if you can talk their language, you understand their pain points, then that goes to making them feel more comfortable to open a conversation to start with. When it comes to tech, return on investment has become extremely important. If it's not return on investment, it is, how, as you said, how is that piece of technology going to impact the guest experience in a positive way? Am I going to be able to sell more room nights? Is it going to attract, more guests? Am I going to achieve efficiencies by delivering that technology? So they're all important things to keep in mind. I think as we've talked about a lot, certainly over the short term, helping hoteliers deal with the labour shortage is going to be a big one. Because, as demand increases, we're already seeing now here in the Australian market, there are hotels that cannot, make their full complement of rooms available to guests primarily on weekends, with a staycation or leisure guest. They can't open up their full complement of rooms because they don't have enough staff to actually clean those rooms. They don't have enough laundry available to them from the laundry because they don't have enough staff to actually clean and deliver the sheets. So anything that can help in that regard will be highly regarded. And that's where you'll grab hoteliers' attention. And that could be, there could be the introduction of robots to help in housekeeping. I think that's where we'll see robots first and foremost. I know in China that delivery robots have become very popular over the last couple of years. But talking to hoteliers here in the Australian market, they don't quite have an appetite for delivery robots as yet. But a number that I've spoken to, there's a couple that have deployed vacuuming robots to take some load off housekeeping. And there are others, and I'm working with one at the moment who's looking for a robot that can actually, help keep the marble floor within the property looking as good as it possibly can. At the moment, he said that, whenever he comes in, the floor doesn't look as good as he thinks, and it's probably just down to manpower, not having enough manpower overnight, for a person to put as much time into getting it to look good. So if they had a robot that could do that, then they'd be quite happy with that.
Yeah, I think the robot one's always an interesting one. For sure, you're right in saying it's been much more widely adopted here, both in hotels, but also residential buildings and restaurants particularly. It's, again, I use them as a really good example of companies, when they implement certain technologies, there needs to be a plan in place for how we're going to start using it. I see probably 50% of the hotels I visit, when I order my room service, it's not being delivered by a robot, despite the fact that there is a robot in the lobby, and the others are putting it to work. So I think we tend to avoid the idea of hotels who want to implement certain technologies as a marketing gimmick. I think if you want to go all out and you believe that tech value proposition is the thing for your hotel, then you can consider it as a marketing ploy. But that has to, from our side, be the last thing you're considering of how can we use this to market the property. You need to consider on a much more operational level first in terms of how you're going to implement the tech. And I think on the first point you made as well, and I'll try and wrap up with this one because I think it's a nice one, is that it's about speaking the language. We're very aware of that here at Tuya, and I'm doing my best. I'm learning my hotel lingo as I go. But, the people I speak to have been in the game like yourself for 30, 40 years almost. It's very much that we do not intend to be going and trying to speak the full lingo. It's, it takes years of experience to understand that. We're, at the end of the day, we're still the IT company. So we just want to find the people who do have that knowledge, who do, let's say, speak the language, and believe that they can bring this to the local markets. We want to provide those guys with the tech to get into this. And we believe as we increase the available number of people, solution providers who understand the technology, know how to work alongside the hotel and successfully implementing it, we believe that this will significantly increase adoption and therefore hopefully improve the quality of hoteling worldwide. So that's what we tend to focus on. Is our vision for us is that making tech more available from our side, and acting kind of as the base layer for those who do speak the language, let's say, and do have a very deep understanding of how hotels run, to take what aspects they think are really relevant, whether or not it's just choosing the access control piece, or whether or not it's energy management, or they want to go for the full shebang. We just want to focus on making it accessible so people can take that and move forwards and really do something interesting in their local markets.
That makes perfect sense, Dylan.
So yeah, I think on that note, Brendon, we'll probably wrap up for today. So I want to have huge thanks for your time. It's been a really interesting chat, and I'm sure we'll be in touch very, very soon as we go forwards. For all guests who have attended today, I will leave all of Brendon's contact details as well in an email for those of you that signed up. So if you have any questions, particularly if you're located in the Australian region, feel free to get in touch with Brendon. He's a fantastic guy, and he'll do a fantastic job at helping you guys out and getting into smart solutions. So I'll wrap up with there today, guys. And Brendon, thank you very much again. Hugely appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dylan. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Perfect. Okay, cool. We'll wrap up. Start recording.